Hi everyone, my name is Pisant Balyozyan.
And my name is Carla Abrahamian.
We are happy to introduce you to the InnovatEd Talks, part of AGBU Germany's Education Stream initiative. Our Armenian General Benevolent Union's German chapter was established in 2020. As an organization, we are involved in different aspects from culture, humanitarian aid, and education, and the Education Stream is a specialized group of active individuals from different educational backgrounds bringing forward innovative and engaging topics. These topics are beneficial for the public.
Welcome to InnovatEd Talks. We will be hosting experts in the education field from leading global organizations, and we would like to discuss innovative education and career orientation topics that would address current opportunities and challenges in education globally.
You can follow us on our social media network on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, found in the description below. Hello everyone, I'm Pisant Balyozyan.
And I'm Carla Abrahamian. Welcome to InnovatEd Talks.
Today's episode is with Harry Glorikian. Harry, you have studied biology at San Francisco State University, have an MBA from Boston University, you have worked on the Human Genome Project. In short, you are a healthcare and biotech expert with extensive experience in driving innovation and strategic growth. You've had various leadership roles in companies, including your role as a general partner at Scientia Ventures.
You are also an author and thought leader. You've written 3 books in total on AI, and the latest is Future You, published in 2021. You also have your own podcast, the Harry Glorikian Show, talking about AI in healthcare. So both Pisant and I have read your book. So mine was on Kindle, and then
I have the printed copy, old school.
So in this book, you explore the intersection of artificial intelligence and healthcare, and you highlight the potential of AI to transform our personal healthcare management. So how AI can help you to be healthier, to stress less, and to live longer. You also recommend that physicians use AI solutions to support decision-making processes in the hospitals. But we think if we got your book right, the problem remains, as you have stated in your book, how to use all of this data generated, whether from these wearables, such as Apple Watch or other watches or other tech tools, to predict an outcome. In a sense, what do you think is the most effective way to make use of this big data that is generated?
So it really depends on who's using it and for what purpose, right? I mean, this is an incredible tool that people can utilize in different ways. I mean, if you think about like how I personally use it, right, is just keeping track of my own metrics, right? How did I sleep? What's my VO2 max? In other words, how well does my body process oxygen? And, a lot of times it tells me things and I'm like, asilavche, like this is like something's wrong, right? So I need to take a look at it. And I will tell you 9.5 times out of 10, it's correct, right? In what it's saying, hey, you need to do something, right? Whatever it is. And I've slowly tried to incrementally make changes or lifestyle changes that would then result in an improvement in that. From a physician perspective, I think some of the low-hanging fruit are things like, help me with these notes. Like just like help me get the paperwork done, right? Or help me with the billing part of it. But then if you think about like radiology or pathology, anything with an image, I mean, you can basically teach the machine every image ever, right? And what does that image correlate to? Like that's not what the human brain was designed for. So I think it can help them make more accurate judgments or see tiny things that maybe if they're in a hurry, they might miss. So and that's just the beginning. When you think about like, if you're in a intensive care unit and everything is beeping and bopping and booping, human beings tend to like start tuning out the beeps and the bops. Well, the machine will tell you, hey, by the way, the person in bed number 4, in the next 48 to 72 hours, they're going to have, it's going to be bad. So do something now to get ahead of it. So these are all like just I'm barely scratching the surface of what you can do with this technology, and it's just going to get. Actually, it's funny. I feel like I'm talking about technology that's at least a year old. I mean, now with generative AI and everything, I just think we're going to see another stepwise change. And the biggest problem is medicine is not. They're not very good adopters of change. They're very slow to change. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It's interesting because you also mentioned in your book how you were diagnosed with sleep apnea, and then after wearing your Apple Watch, which was 3 years after, you get the notification that, hey, you might have sleep apnea. So it's kind of also a diagnostic tool. And you also mentioned in your book how this could delay emergencies. So, for example, older people who could wear some watches that could detect arrhythmia or so on, that could say, yeah, you need to actually go into the emergency.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you go into a hospital, what do? They hook you up with all these sensors, right? And they're trying to figure out what's going on. Well, I mean, why couldn't you just wear? The sensors are getting so much smaller. Why can't you just wear it on your wrist, right? So if you think about, if I wear an Apple Watch, I have a blood pressure cuff, I have a wireless scale, and then I have Siri, like not the existing Siri, because the existing, stop it, the existing one is just dumb, right? He was about to say something, so I turned it off. But if you get a smarter Siri, say that's more generative AI based, all of a sudden it's like, hey, Puzant, Carla, what happened last night? You didn't sleep well, your heart rate was up, blah, blah, blah. Now, it doesn't know that the night before you went out for kebab and you might have had a few, cocktails with your friends or whatever, but it'll be your constant companion to sort of alert you for that. And you can read, I mean, there are stories almost once a month on somebody who ended up in the emergency room because their Apple Watch said, hey, you're having a problem, you should go, and it probably saved their life.
Yeah,
so
a lot of cardiac cases as well, atrial fibrillation, and there's a lot of published now data on different cases. So it's definitely going to be integrated into our lives.
Harry, what are some of the products that you're using? Like apart from the Apple Watch and some applications, maybe you could name some products and devices.
So I mean, at one point I think I was using everything, and it was funny because my kids were like, Bob, like what else are you going to stick on yourself, Jay? Okay. And I was like, well, if I'm going to write about it and I'm going to talk about it, I need to use it, Jay. So I mean, the things that I would say to people, I think, are important. Again, it depends on what their goals are. But I think the Apple Watch is a just good all-around sort of data aggregation device. If you think you are a pre-diabetic or you want to manage your diet, a glucose monitor, a wireless glucose monitor, where in Europe, by the way, like you can just go to the drugstore and get one. Here you need a prescription, right? We're a little behind on that here. I would definitely say a blood pressure cuff, right? For most people, because you don't know when your blood pressure is going up and you can keep track of it ahead of time. A wireless scale, right? Again, so that you can see how you're doing weight-wise. Those are if I said like those are the entry things, like that would be the entry point and then you would sort of get a good idea of your overall health.
There was another example in your book. You were talking about using portable X-ray devices to vent the emergency room and, the undercapacity of accommodating patients.
So if you go to other parts of the world, right, there are technologies like, the butterfly device, which is a small portable device that, hooks up to your phone and you can use it, say, in the field. I mean, from the US perspective or Western Europe, I think we have enough capacity to sort of get to people. But if you were in an emergency situation where you really need to look at something, these technologies allow you to move in that direction. And they're getting smaller, and they're getting better, and they're getting faster. And the irony is they're getting smarter, right? Because I can actually give you one of these devices, and the device will tell you, no, move up, no, move down, no, move a little to the left, and it will help you get a better picture of what's going on, as opposed to, I don't know what I'm doing, right? And the machine will help you figure it out to get the best answer. So I think half of the impediment of how quickly this stuff gets adopted is, how much does the medical system sort of slow it down? And the second thing is, everybody wants to get paid, right? And so they want to know, well, if I'm using this, how am I going to get paid for it? And those two are huge impediments to how quickly technology is adopted.
I was talking to my colleagues, and then they were saying, yeah, but it's like bringing me so much anxiety, especially for people who are hypochondriac, and like constantly saying my Apple Watch giving me a warning that I didn't sleep well enough, or I need to walk, or I need to do this, and it's like creating also kind of you're constantly monitoring yourself, and it's also scaring even young people. And come to convince my own grandma to to get into this kind of technology is also another challenge that I think is not discussed.
No, you're right. I mean, there are, I probably know a lot about myself, and it was funny because my wife was saying, if you didn't know about this, you wouldn't worry. I said, yes, but then it would sneak up on me and there would be a serious problem. Like, I would rather figure out how to manage that problem. I mean, my dad died of a heart attack when I was 8. Yeah. I don't want to be like that, right? I'd like to, if there's something I can do to mitigate the problem, like I want to mitigate the problem. But I think people just have to, I don't think they're used to it. And I think what they need to do is get familiar with it and then come up with, say, migrate their habits. My wife is a perfect example. Like, well, we would have a cocktail, we'd have a glass of wine, we'd do whatever, check. And then she noticed, like, man, when I have that glass of wine or whatever at 9 o'clock at night, my deep sleep is ruined, right? And she's like, you know what? That glass of wine is not worth ruining that night's sleep. So you know what? I'm just going to skip it. So her drinking has gone, not that she was a big drinker anyway, but it has gone to almost nothing at this point. So that is, a health benefit for her. But if she didn't have the data, I don't think she would have ever changed a habit.
What about the experience we had from the COVID pandemic and how AI helped us to develop the vaccines? And, your recommendations towards the policymakers, how effective can we target probably an upcoming pandemic in case something like that is upcoming? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the policymakers. I mean, the problem is, people who don't understand just don't understand, and then they politicize it, and it becomes a huge problem just because they're politicizing it, right? As opposed to, if you were actually trying to solve a problem, you would think about a methodology on how to solve that problem. I do really appreciate, like, when we were in the middle of the pandemic, the level of researchers working together was unprecedented. We had never seen anything like that on a global basis. Everybody was sharing everything. And even when we started managing patients, we quickly figured out that standard procedure was not working. And quickly everybody understood, like, wait, this is not the same animal. We need to think about how to deal with this differently. Technologies came out much faster, right? As we know, the vaccine was developed in record time, right? Never seen a therapy developed, tested, and launched in that period of time in the history, right? So a lot of these things were very positive. The negative was we probably didn't have enough testing. to understand who was sick and who wasn't sick, to understand where we were dealing with this. And at least from the United States perspective, I think if we had been more proactive, we could have actually potentially mitigated some of the issues that happened. I mean, as far as policymakers, I always tell people, like, you need to get ahead of the curve. You need to support innovation. You need to think about how to put in the policies to support advanced technologies that will sort of keep us safe, because the next pandemic is going to come. Right? If you look at history of mankind, it's inevitable. So if they don't get their arms around this and don't understand it, and then from an AI perspective, I think policymakers do I don't even know if they know what A and the I stand for, right? And so I really would encourage them to get ahead of this, like spend the time to understand it, because the implications are, I think, much more profound than people are giving it credit for, right? Most people will call it a tool. And I would say, I don't remember my hammer talking back to me, right? But this technology will actually talk back to me, right? In 40 different languages. That's not, that's a little bit more than a tool, depending on how you put it to work.
Actually, in this case, then one must think also about the ethical questions, right? So AI-enabled healthcare always raises the issues of data privacy and ethical considerations. So you mentioned in your book, for example, about gene editing, that if you say if this gene causes a disease in the fetus, why not edit also other features in these fetuses? So I also myself worked with the gene editing in cancer, and people, when I say this, they ask me the craziest questions, even like on topics that are unrelated, on human cloning and and this kind of things. I think generally, like, people are scared of things that they don't know, and so how do you keep the balance of keeping your morality as a scientist first, and then also then to the general population,
Like
all while using these technologies? Yeah.
Where are the boundaries, probably, of the ethical questions?
Exactly.
Well, it's funny, right? I mean, as humans, we're always technically we're pushing the boundaries, right? I mean, like, I don't think there's ever a time where people are not pushing on a boundary somewhere, right? I said in my book at one point, right, the difference between evolution and revolution is time. And what's happening is we're seeing a compression of the pushing of the boundaries. So everybody's like, what's going on? Like, hold up, like, slow down, like, this is a problem. It's because they don't have the time to actually think about it, right? And how it's going to impact and what the implications are, right? People need time to digest, right? I mean, when you eat something, your body needs time to process the food. It's the same thing with what we're doing in these areas, and it's moving at light speed. When it comes to things like gene editing, I mean, I do believe that the world has agreed to standards that we don't go beyond. Now, there are probably people in countries that are violating those standards all the time, unfortunately. And the funny thing is I think these people think they're smarter than, biology. I mean, biology is super complex, as you know, right? It doesn't always do what we want it to do. And, when you push on something here, like 18 steps over here, something happens. Okay? So changing one gene is one thing, but to make someone taller, or to make someone smarter, or to make someone that's not one gene, right? It's not changing one letter, from, an A to a T. It's much more complicated than that. So making multiple changes and expecting what you're expecting, I'm highly skeptical that we're going to figure that out anytime soon. Well, but if you look at like, we've got something now for blindness in children, right? Sickle cell. I mean, there are certain things where you're like, I mean, if you understand the science, you're like, wow, like that is just super cool, right? And people don't appreciate like how incredibly cool it is, like, and what we just did, which was amazing. They're always thinking about like 18 steps down when it's way more complicated. I'm like, guys, come back here, ground, even what we did today, which is change this one letter and this person doesn't have this problem anymore. Like that's a big deal, right? Dealing with people that don't understand the science can be frustrating sometimes.
And maybe also on another point, the business side of this is also taking part in the ethical consideration. So if you have the tools, you develop the tools, for example, that you, for example, envision that could stop another pandemic in the future that inevitably could happen. So are companies willing to sell or willing to make this publicly available for it to actually prevent another pandemic from taking place?
It's similar to the patents question. So there are some patents that could save many lives, and many companies just don't want to give the rights to other companies to use it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
so during the Corona times, it was the speed at which things moved into the development of a vaccine was due to open science, due to the availability of the data, right? But I'm not sure if these kind of technologies that entrepreneurs put so much money into would actually make it available for others to just grab.
No, if your expectation is that, then the government needs to step up and take all the risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's private capital that's taking risk, that private capital wants to be rewarded for taking that risk. If your expectation is that this is going to be, available to everybody, then it needs to be done on a governmental level so it's available to the public. That said, if it wasn't for all the government spending, we probably wouldn't have developed half the things that you are available today that you see, right? Because grants and everything else are the basic foundation of all the fundamental R&D that comes up. So there is a little bit of a push and pull there, but I don't think you will get everything always being available if it's not being funded fully to completion by a government body that therefore is funded by the public.
Yeah, now that we're talking about funding and investments, maybe you could tell us how much are you using AI to make your decisions in funding companies? So you as an investor, as a partner, you definitely look for things in companies and have like factors you want to assess, key factors of these companies. Do you also use AI in assessing them? Or what's your stake at that?
Well, I'm always using AI I'm using it every day, all the time in different ways to just, improve efficiency and look for things and get answers. When I'm looking at a company, we have developed a technology that allows us to look at sort of science as a whole to understand how things are interacting, but also where they're moving. And that's also helpful. But once let's say you've picked that thing, then it really is all about like, is that going to be a big enough market? Who's running the company? Are they the right team? Do you think they have the right go-to-market strategy? So it switches from, this is going to be one of those technologies to, can they actually pull it off, right? Can they make it happen? And so it switches from a pure technological understanding and decision to all the human factors that really come into play to make a company successful.
So also coming from your career path, you were a scientist, a biologist, and you were working on the Human Genome Project. And then you created your strategy consulting company, which you sold. I found it super interesting to, we as scientists, we always think about how are we going to bring our products into market? How are we going to establish companies that are solving many of the problems these days. What was your story? How did you do it? Because many of our audience, the people who are listening to our podcast, are interested to know what did Harry do in his first company and how did he move from a scientist to an entrepreneur?
So, okay, let me go back in time a little bit. I mean, I've always had that stupid entrepreneurial bug. I don't want to, you know what? Entrepreneurship is actually a disease. I'm not sure. Right? Because if you think about it, we do things and people are like, what is wrong with that guy? Right? Like, I get that a lot. But in reality, like, I thought I was really going to be hardcore science. And when I graduated, it was the early 90s, and the country was in a recession. I mean, I had enough letters saying, you know, thank you, but no thank you. Like, I could have wallpapered my wall. And then I saw a sales job at a pathology company, and I was like, I need a job. Like, I got to pay my bills. Like, and I literally talked my way into this job. I mean, I rehearsed the entire interview before I got there. And I mean, I don't want to say you know, I don't know how PG that is, but bullshit my way into this job. But literally, like, whatever it took to get this job, because like I had to pay the bills. So I got into the job and I'm like, okay, now I got the job. You've never sold anything. Like, what are you going to do? So I literally, you know, I had to learn how to do all those different things. And it was luckily the job combined science and, you know, being able to apply business tactics. I got to teach a lot of courses on immunohistochemistry, and I got to actually like work on some of the science and do stuff like that. So that really gave me that thought I was going to be working in a lab. I ended up being on the business side, not because I thought I was going to end up there. I think it was just out of necessity of like, okay, these bills need to get paid. So whatever needs to get done, I'll do. And then I just ended up staying there ever since. And then once we got done with the genome at Applied Biosystems, I remember one of the senior managers saying to me, oh, now we're going to do the proteome. And I was like, we're going to do what? We're going to do the proteome. I mean, we got this. And I'm like, okay, the genome is like 4 bases, right? I'm not going to say it's simple, but it's a lot simpler than the proteome. And I was like, oh, this is not going to go. This is not going to go well, right? So I ended up leaving. And again, I sort of accidentally started my consulting firm. It wasn't like I woke up and go, I'm going to start a consulting firm. Like, I met this guy, Arshad Ahmed, who ended up being my partner. We sold our first consulting project. And it was so funny. He goes, how did you do that? I'm like, how did I do what? He goes, you sold this project. I'm like, yeah, but we need to like we need to eat, like we need like income. Of course you sell something, Che. And he goes, okay, can you do that again? I'm like, yeah. So we started doing it again, and the thing just grew.
And then you know, selling? What were you particularly selling?
Strategy consulting in the sciences. So at that time, this whole concept of molecular diagnostics was like, you know, what is PCR? What's gene testing? What all this sort of stuff was brand new, and all these big companies were like, what is this? So we were getting hired by them to sort of explain it, figure it out, understand the patent landscape, understand the strategy, who should they acquire, Yevilan. And the thing just grew, and then we grew into other areas of pharma and medical devices and other areas. And then at some point, private equity group came along and said, we love what you're doing. We want to buy you. And so they acquired the company, and you know, that's that history.
It's a really nice transition. I have to say, the first thing you sold then was yourself, right?
Well, I always tell people, like, learning how to sell is such a critical skill. Like, you got to understand how to either sell yourself or sell a concept, or, you know, and the better you are at telling that story, I think the more successful you can be. And there's a number of people that, you know, we can point to that are amazing storytellers, right? And so you can see how their success based on their ability to captivate someone's mind or tell a story.
Actually, on mentioning the proteomics and your companies, so we watched your TED Talk, Pisant and I, and so it's you can find it on YouTube. It's called The Catalyst for Smarter and Faster Scientific Discoveries. So we were actually kind of a bit debating about this, but we don't have, of course, enough information from the 5-minute YouTube video to be really debating. But so you basically built kind of an explainable AI language that can analyze terabytes of data. So you've collected data from I think
25,000 papers, publications.
Yes, exactly, from different journals, and then you piled it up, and then you discuss within the context of ALS and Alzheimer and proteomics. So yeah, I'm also involved in kind of proteomics, spatial proteomics, single cell proteomics, which is the way that science is moving. So I was interested in how do you assess, for example, these publications that you're collecting and you're piling up in one large box, let's say, and then from that you are collecting all of this data and kind of having main points for the different diseases,
like key outcomes.
Key outcomes. How do you assess that already? How do you assess the data that is available to be that? Is it a good paper? Is it are the results, do they make sense? Or how do you do the filtering system?
So we did feed it everything that was in Medline and a couple of other very, very large bodies of research that we could get that were freely available. They were not behind paywalls, right? So there is a certain amount of data that we're missing that I think would just make it much better if you had that body of water. So it was, and then we, yes, right. And then we zoomed in, like, I mean, at some point when you're looking at all of science, it literally looks like a ball of hair, right? There's just too much going on. So we zoomed in on proteomics because we just picked that and said, okay, let's pick one and zoom in. It still ended up being like almost 26,000 articles across 29 journals, right? Then it was like trying to figure out, okay, we had designed the AI system to basically start to look at all the words that are in the paper, not the materials and methods. So we weren't looking at numerical outcomes and things like that. But what it was trying to do is say, if I read this sentence, how do I figure out what the ideas are? How do I figure out what the ideas are that are moving together? And then how do I figure out how they're moving through time? So in other words, if I only said, hey, okay, here's 10 papers, analyze it, I'm not going to be able to give you much. I actually have to have time as a factor. And so what we were able to do is show how these technologies interact. Because if you think about like CRISPR is made of two pieces that came together to make the CRISPR technology, right? Same in PROTAC. It was two technologies that came together that became something. So what you're trying to do is look at how science is interacting with each other, and then use time as a factor to say, okay, are these concepts moving away, moving together, how they're doing it? And then you can actually mathematically start to predict which ones are going to be the most applicable ones for you to focus on. And what we figured out was the machine is right 63% of the time in what it tells you to look at. Now, if you compare that to the batting average of a human, the machine is orders of magnitude better, right? So if it already tells me, Harry, okay, don't look at all this, only look at these top 10. Then I can look at the top 10 and go, these 3 are out. Those 4 are too small of a market. Okay, I'm only going to focus on these 3. You're improving your potential of hitting the ball, if that makes sense. And so that's how we ended up developing it. Now, ironically, we have taken that technology and turned it towards finance. And we've created a company called Consilience, which is the originator of the technology. And if you know the definition of consilience, it's sort of all the data that came before it will tell you what's going to happen next. And so we're using that to look at financial documents like Edgar documents and so forth, and we can actually quantify risk as it is evolving in each one of these companies, and whether risk is going up or risk is going down. And so you can actually, from a trading perspective or insight perspective, you can get a better idea of which stocks to keep, which stocks not to keep, et cetera. And so I am now technically the CEO of a fintech company, which is a little outside my normal wheelhouse, but it's going well. We launched the product about 3 months ago using the same fundamental technology.
Interesting. I have a more general and a typical question about AI. So in your episode with Rafi Krikorian, who's a former executive at Twitter, you were talking about jobs and AI. And NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang has mentioned that AI will not steal your jobs, but people who use AI will. So how much do you agree with this definition? And what is your future, let's say, what is your advice to the future generations?
Oh, 100%. I mean, and I've told this to physicians and students when I give my talks. I mean, those people that understand how to use it will outperform and outmaneuver those that don't. I mean, if you think about it, at one point, like, if you didn't take a typing class and understand how to type, like, you know, you were automatically gonna outperform the next guy, right? And then it became what? Excel, Word. People were actually putting these things on their resume, che? I know Word, like, okay, big deal, right? At this point, like, everybody knows Word. But at the time, you needed to understand how to use these technologies and tools to, you know, utilize them in your everyday work. And I think now it's like water, like it's fundamental. You have to play with this stuff. And I always tell people, there's a phrase, it's FAFO, fool around and find out. Like, this isn't, it's $20 a month. Actually, most of the tools are free. Just go online and start playing with it, right? Have a discussion with it, ask it a question, try to do something with it. And it's just going to improve your productivity or it can improve your productivity by orders of magnitude. If you're not using it, it's not going to be a good outcome, right? Because it's like, okay, I go into an exam and the guy sitting next to me has a calculator and I don't. Who's going to perform better or faster, right? And if that's the measure, the guy with the calculator is going to win. So you have to use these tools, and they're just evolving so quickly that, you know, I would tell people, if you don't start now and you don't, like, then it's going to be too far ahead, and it's happening too fast. Like, I expect by the end of the year, if they release GPT-5, I mean, technically that will be an order of magnitude better than what we have today. And so that's the other problem. Most people can't imagine the world in orders of magnitude, right? They think about it in incremental steps, right? The human brain was more designed for that than orders of magnitude. So trying to think about how something could be that much better, and then, well, if it's that much better, like, what can I actually do? You know, that's a huge leap for most people. So I beg people, literally beg people, like, please just play with it. And I think, so it was McKinsey, Deloitte, KPMG, somebody just released something saying only 2% of Fortune 500 executives have even played with GPT-4. And I'm like, why? It's free. It's free. Play with it. Like, what is stopping you from playing with it? And it's incredible to me that they haven't started fooling around with it.
Too conservative, maybe.
I think people just think it's like this random tool, and I just don't understand that it's just fundamentally not some random thing. It's I mean, I think by the end of the year, everybody on their phone will have the most super assistant you could possibly, I mean, for what we have at that time, it'll be just an incredible assistant that'll be sitting like in your hand, that'll do things that, you know, will blow your mind if you actually push the envelope. And wouldn't you want to understand or play with that a little bit to get the most out of it, right? And those people that understand will rocket past those that don't understand. I mean, it's going to be I think a stepwise difference between those that do understand versus those that don't bother to understand.
And particularly, you also talk about the physicians who are using AI, and on this platform, I'd like to send my regards to my uncle Armen and to my sister Patil in Cleveland and in Boston. What do you tell them as physicians? What do you recommend to them? How much AI should they integrate, and what are the tools you would recommend?
I mean, I always tell, Armin and I are always talking about this stuff, like to the point where I think he's like a pave. You know, and he listens to my podcast. I mean, he will come back to me and regurgitate, you know, tell me things that, you know, specifically in the, and in reality, we just both got a cardiac CT because I had done a podcast with some guys in the UK that have this AI algorithm looking at cardiac CT. So I think it's people are listening and people are moving the ball forward. Is it as fast as I would like to see? Absolutely not. But I use it all the time. Like I'll take all my medical results and I will, of course, anonymize it. But I'll be like, hey, what do you think, right? And I'll write a decent prompt, right? 58-year-old male, blah, 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 blah. Tell me what you see and tell me, you know, what are your recommendations? Man, like gives me a phenomenal output. And then I can play questions like, well, okay, what can I do to improve this? What do you think is happening here? What do I need to be thinking about? Blah, blah, and I can have a discussion with it, right? And it's amazing. And I think physicians need to think about utilizing these technologies for their own education, to keep up with the latest, you know, data that's coming out, to maybe summarize papers to just make it easier for them to keep up. And then from a commercial perspective, I think companies are developing technologies to help. Your notes will be faster. The billing system will work more seamlessly. Radiology will be easier to interpret. Pathology will be easier to interpret. So I think there's a combination of how do you use it personally, but how does, from a commercial perspective, this come into play to help advance medicine?
Thank you very much, Harry. It was a pleasure talking to you. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and we learn a lot from our conversations with you.
And from your books and podcasts.
So to our audience again, this is Future You from Harry Glorikian. It's a great read. I highly recommend it, and we will stay in touch.
Yeah. Thank you, Harry. You can follow us also on our YouTube channel, on our Instagram, and you can find our upcoming episodes. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.